I've been derelict tonight. I've been derelict as a pirate ship. I have been forgetting when Steve Romine was on, we activated the Woodstock Community Network, which means that we are on Woodstock Public Access Channel 23. So, proudly, she says, this is the Woodstock Community Network, which is Woodstock Access TV, and Woodstock 104, which is WIOFLP, Woodstock 104. And now it is time for PotTalk with Joe Barton.
Marijuana in my yard. Growing marijuana in my yard. Got little pots of pie spread out all over the lot, 'cause I'm growing marijuana in my yard. Well, I got the seed from Mexico. Stick it in some dirt and let it grow. Put it in my garden with my peppers and my peas, and I get all the smoke I need to breathe. 'Cause I'm growing marijuana in my yard. Growing marijuana in my yard. We keep it where no one can see, so let's keep this between you and me. But I'm growing marijuana in my yard. 'Cause I'm growing marijuana in my yard. I can't tell I'm boss or I'll get fired. I don't grow much, just what I use. I work all day, and when I'm through, I smoke some marijuana from my yard. Now the policeman wants to talk to me. He says, how you gonna smoke up all that weed? He says, money's what you're in it for. Don't you know we're in a war? Now I'm gonna haul your ass downtown with me. I said, hey man, what is it to you? How do I infringe on what you do? Well, I beg your pardon if you're offended by my garden. I just can't grow Prozac in my yard. So I grow my own medicine in my yard. I give some to my neighbor for his heart. Share it with my grandma and keeps it from her son. 'Cause we all know that stuff's against the law. Now there's nothing growing in my yard. 'Cause cops will call my land and both my cars. Now I have to buy my pot from a teenager in the parking lot who's growing marijuana in his yard. Oh, anyone can grow it in their yard. Hey, I can show you how, it ain't hard. Never mind the president, let's overgrow the government and all grow marijuana in our yard. Let's grow some marijuana in
Okay, hello out there in television and radio land. This is another episode of PotTalk, and we're going to have a lady call in a little shortly, Celia, and she was with, Cecily, sorry, Cecily, and she was involved with all the activists that Occupy Wall Street, and she's been very active, and she's, for me, another one of our heroes, because she stood up to the system, and she's still standing up to the system. And like anybody who stands up to the system, she's been attacked and run through the courts and framed, and she's gonna tell you about that. But I'd like Paula to read something that's on Cecily's website before we bring her on, and so why don't you read that, Paula?
Okay, this is from the website, which I'd encourage you to go to, justiceforcecily.com, and spell out FOR. Although she said the numeral worked, it didn't for me.
But
justiceforcecily.com.
Spelled out comes up better.
Yeah, justiceforcecily.com. About Cecily. By the way, when Joe Elmo first connected us with her, I thought her name was not Cecily McMillian, but Cecily. And I thought, wow, isn't that great? You've got, the Sicilian culture and the Irish culture. But Cecily is a marvelous woman. She's 26 years old, and she reminds me a bit of Marie Tooker. And I think when you hear her on the radio, you'll understand why. Cecily McMillian is a 26-year-old Occupy activist and union organizer who was convicted in May 2014 of allegedly assaulting a police officer on March 17, 2012. She received strong support from activists in New York City and around the world during her felony trial and subsequent jail sentence. In October 2014, she is facing a misdemeanor charge for filming police officers in a subway station. After 2 years of censoring evidence and hand-selecting jurors, the prosecution was blatantly favored with overwhelming bias from Judge Ronald Zweibel. In a shocking verdict that stunned outside observers, she was found guilty despite insufficient evidence, and Zweibel sentenced Cecily to 90 days in jail at Rikers Island along with 5 years of probation. She was remanded without bail to jail on May 5, 2014, despite having missed no court appointments over 2 years of hearings and her public insistence on refusing to plea out. Cecily was released from jail on good behavior on July 2nd. She has conducted several interviews maintaining her innocence, and she has spoken out against deliberately inhumane conditions for inmates at Rikers. See media coverage. Upon her release, Cecily wrote an op-ed that was printed in the New York Times, and her interview appeared as a feature story in Cosmopolitan. The op-ed was accompanied by the release of a petition, was signed by over 10,000 people, at which point Cecily and her allies delivered them to the Commissioner of Corrections on Rikers Island. By the way, if you go to Justice for Cecily, it's Cecily. During the long period between her initial arrest and the jury trial, Cecily was apprehended in December 2013 on false charges by NYPD officers collaborating with the District Attorney's Office. Assistant District Attorney Aaron Choi discussed the arrest, including fabricated police testimony, at length in her closing arguments, which was admitted illegal by Judge Zweibel. Cecily returns to court on October 6, 2014, on the charge of obstructing government administration. And that's near to my heart because that was the charge they put on me during our bust. Her friends were asking for all supporters and allies to join them in packing the courtroom and raising their voices against prosecutorial overreach, police violence, and mass incarceration. If you have not already, please RSVP and spread the word using the hashtag Justice for Cecily. And of course this is old, but she's going to be calling in and giving the updates. We listened to her on Democracy Now!, and we also listened to her on what looked like another public access show, and we quite admired her insistence on truth, justice, and the American way. She's not into blaming people, she's into creating connections of empathy. So there you go. Do we have her on the line?
Yep.
Okay, you bring her up a little bit more.
She's up.
She's
okay. We just read the thing on your website to get our viewers a little knowledgeable about what's going on with you. I'm going to let you take it away and tell your story and educate our listening audience. We're broadcasting on 104 Woodstock Radio. 104 Woodstock.
Woodstock 104.
Woodstock 104. I shouldn't say radio. But anyway, also, it's being broadcast on Woodstock Television.
public access.
Public access television. So you have quite a big audience up here. Tell your story, and we may just jump in and ask a little question or try to get you to fill in some pieces. But take it away.
Okay. Well, I mean, I guess I moved to New York City August 2011 to attend graduate school at the New School. And about a week after I was there, I ended up in the planning meetings of Occupy Wall Street over at Tompkins Square Park on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. And I sort of established myself fairly quickly as a sort of backhanded title, the Queen of Nonviolence. I really felt like before we went down to the park, we needed to have an Occupy Wall Street statement of nonviolence based off of history and the way that even if your intent is to be nonviolent, then there can be provocateurs that come in and disrupt things and paint you in a certain light. Sort of in those planning stages when the group did not settle on a statement of nonviolence before we went down, I decided not to go down that first day because it was something that really meant something to me.
Excuse me, Cecily, how could someone not sign on to nonviolence?
It wasn't that they were violent. It was that, there were a lot of things to discuss and suss out before we set up the occupation. And because we work on consensus, which is a process where everybody has to agree to something that represents all of us, that the group didn't feel like there was really enough time to develop a statement that really represented everybody. Like, some people may think that throwing a rock into a window is violent. Other people may not. Some people may think that speech like, F the police is violent. Other people may not. So it was a matter of really sussing through that conversation. Really, by September 23rd, they did adopt a statement of nonviolence after enough conversation was had.
Thank you.
Go on, please.
Yeah. So I didn't even go down to the park that first day. I did follow it online, and after I saw that despite the violence of police against the occupiers, that they remained nonviolent, I did go down the second day and got really involved in Occupy Wall Street until its eviction less than 2 months later on November 15th. I guess I was present at the park on the 6-month anniversary of Occupy Wall Street on March 17th, 2012, which also happened to be St. Patrick's Day. Up to that point, I had been arrested once. I was attempting to lead a human barricade onto Wall Street the same night that all of the unions had joined us down at Zuccotti Park. There was about up to 15,000 union workers down there, and I figured that that was exactly the right time to try to actually take the New York Stock Exchange. And with about a dozen people and later 300 and later 3,000 behind us, we linked arms and tried to march on to Occupy Wall Street, where we were met with pepper spray. I was pepper sprayed twice, then sat down cross-legged with my hands in the air as peace signs. And the white shirt officer who had made eye contact with me while I was counting down then kicked me in the chest backwards, kicked me over, breaking or fracturing my my rib, stomped on my head and pulled me up with a force so hard by handcuffs that he made my wrist bleed and my shoulder disconnect. When he shoved me forward, the shoulder popped back into place, and the image of that was sort of published in Rolling Stone magazine. And from that point on, I was really targeted at every event that I went to. I wasn't charged that evening. I was caught and released, and another NYPD illegal tactic. But from then on out, every event that I went to, at some point somebody would say, hey, listen, I heard the police talking. They know who you are, and they're gunning for you. You got to get out before, that first arrest warning, or they're going to nab you. And so up until the 6-month anniversary of Occupy Wall Street, I made it out every time. But on that day, I was actually not even in the park but 15 minutes. It was St. Patrick's Day. I'm in McMillian. A friend was out of town. I had planned to celebrate St. Patrick's Day and only went down to the park for about 15 minutes before I guess the police began clearing the park. I lost my friends and was texting, and a police officer told me that I had to go. And, the last thing that I said to my dad that evening was, don't worry, I won't get arrested in this outfit. I was in all green, head to toe, nail polish and eyeliner to be included. And I was 3 or 4 steps away from the edge of the park when I was grabbed from behind in a seatbelt grab from the waist up to my breast, and then flung face first into the concrete. That was kind of the last thing that I really remembered, other than some fuzzy memories of my face being against some grates and not being able to breathe. And but I woke up in the early morning hours of March 18th, handcuffed to a hospital bed with an officer at my foot, and I had no idea what had happened. 40 hours later, I was let go and charged with felony assault of an officer. As it turned out, the officer, or the person that had grabbed me, that I never had a conversation with or knew whatsoever, grabbed me from behind at the breast, and then half a dozen officers responded by kicking and beating me in retaliation. And I suffered blunt force trauma to the head that resulted in a series of grand mal seizures. I don't have seizures, so that's why I don't remember anything. This went on for about 12 or so minutes as I was in handcuffs, repeatedly hitting my head on the ground, and those watching were calling for an ambulance, at which point the police turned away the paramedics. So that there was no medical professional on scene to clarify that, in their professional opinion, I'd had a seizure. So that happened, and 2 years later, after refusing to take a plea bargain for something that I didn't remember doing, would never do, I was put on trial for 4 weeks. After the judge was hand-selected, the most conservative judge in the state, former police litigator, well known as a prosecutor in robes, and 2 of the most well-known vicious prosecutors who are really known for lying, hammered out an unjust conviction in 4 weeks, and then I was remanded without bail to Rikers to face a 7-year sentence. Luckily, there's an international leniency campaign spearheaded by Pussy Riot, and 9 of the 12 jurors, after they were allowed to freely search the details of the case and the media ban imposed by the judge was lifted, wrote to the judge pleading for my release from Rikers. So now that case is pending appeal. I will shortly file my own lawsuit against the city of New York, and I am a very serious prison justice advocate now, and I'm writing a memoir of the experience for the nation.
That's wonderful. Also, since you were involved, I've also done shows talking about how badly the police have treated and railroaded a lot of the people from Occupy. Could you speak on that?
I think that most of the difficulties in the trial was trying to get the jury to not associate the word protester with domestic terrorists. I mean, certainly the way that the media, to some degree, portrayed Occupy Wall Street, or to a better extent, maybe didn't. All of the police violence that occurred throughout the time in Occupy Wall Street was, for more or less, left unchallenged. Most of my friends suffered beatings, pepper sprays, batons to the face, sexual assaults. Mine is one of 24 documented breast grabbings during Occupy Wall Street. There's pictures of a 5-fingered bruise on my breast that was even showed to jurors, at which point the DA said that it was more likely that aliens sexually assaulted me than the police.
I saw that on Amy Goodman's show.
Yeah. So,
but I also saw the footage, and it seemed, that it was very hard to see in that footage that all that damage could happen, and it was blurry. Because what you're describing later, waking up later, you must have been severely beaten up, not on the footage.
Yeah. So there's other footage that does convey the beating, so it's fast and dirty and grainy. But yeah, I mean,
Amy definitely didn't show the best footage then.
Oh, we didn't find it until, we had to go through hundreds of hours of footage and thousands of pictures. Again, not having a mainstream media outlet, I had over 80 documented bruises all over my body and permanent brain damage. So, but that's the case, is, all of my friends have been arrested as a part of Occupy Wall Street through peaceful protest, most of the time legal peaceful protest, and not even nonviolent civil disobedience. There are 700 people arrested on the Brooklyn Bridge that were, in fact, escorted up by the police and then surrounded and arrested one by one over the course of several hours. People were, just the trauma of Occupy Wall Street is something that we, as friends and comrades, certainly have a shared experience of, and it just mostly went unchallenged. People were so afraid of the possibilities of facing jail time that most people were forced into plea bargains that really disallowed them to fight the police later on. That was one of the main reasons. Other than refusing to say I did something that I didn't do, and my strict nonviolence morality that would not allow me to say that I would purposefully hit a police officer. The other big thing was making sure that I could bring this sort of attack and damage to light through a civil suit. And if you plea out, then that's not something that you can really do. So
let me jump in for 1 second. Do you have a pen or pencil handy?
Sure.
Write down False Arrest and Imprisonment by Charles, I think, A. Weissman.
Okay.
And look that up on the internet.
It's a treatise.
It's a treatise on false arrest and imprisonment by Charles A. Weissman. And he gives you so much law, and this is for anybody out there in the audience that should look up A Treatise on False Arrest and Imprisonment by Charles A. Weissman.
Well, yeah, there's probably not a single person that wasn't falsely arrested and imprisoned, and that was a big thing. This catch and release arrest.
None of the lawyers
unfortunately, a lot of those people who were arrested haven't read the false arrest and imprisonment.
I think it's arrest and false imprisonment.
No, I'm sure it's true.
If you get it and pass it around, believe me, it will help a lot, and it will educate a lot of your friends.
Sure.
We do a lot of law cases ourselves and fight a lot of stuff.
I think that really, had I listened to the words of the lawyer who approached me after my first arrest, talking to me about conditions false arrest and imprisonment. I was never brought up on any charges, yet I was held for 26 hours. If I had followed her advice to launch a civil suit at that point, then what happened to me to follow would have been seen blatantly as an attempt to silence me, and I probably never would have had felony charges or gone to Rikers Island. So, I mean,
Right.
I think you're right. That's so important.
But please get that and read that. It's one of the most powerful things for the Occupy movement to it's knowledge that the whole movement needs to know. And I've been fighting court cases and fighting this system since 1974. I was involved in a lot of the anti-Vietnam War movement and a lot of the marijuana movement and also a lot of the civil rights movement. So I've actually been gassed, and I've been through beat by the police in Washington, D.C. and New York, and when the riots...
Well, 1974, that's the Weather Underground stages of Students for Democratic Society then, huh?
Yeah, I knew a lot of those people myself. I wasn't so involved with them because they were a little more violent than I wanted to be. I was always with the peace movement, the nonviolent people like you are. But but over the years, because of all the court cases that I've fought, I've learned to do a lot of research, and the Occupy people really need that Charles A. Weissman stuff, because an educated people don't get railroaded so easy. But go ahead with your story.
I mean, that's kind of where I'm at right now. I mean, there's details I can fill in, certainly. I mean, I think that maybe what most people don't understand is that jail is just kind of the beginning of the imprisonment. I'm still on 5 years of probation. I'm on a Homeland Security watch list. My probation officer has told me that my passport's been revoked, though my lawyer tells me that that is unconstitutional. I cannot leave the state of Georgia without permission, and only for a week. I was sort of strong-armed out of New York once I launched the Resist Rikers campaign after my release. I was sort of told, you can, they pushed up my transfer out of New York to Georgia by an average 8-month wait period to 2 months. And when I said, what happens if I reapply, they said, you can try, and you can see what happens. So my lawyer suggested that I leave New York. He, too, has been involved for a very long time, representing the Catholic workers who napalmed the draft records back in the 70s. And
He wasn't.
He said that he's never seen anybody prosecuted to the extent that I've been prosecuted. And for the life of anybody, nobody can figure out why.
I think it's obstructing governmental administration. They want to create a model. When we were arrested, I had a tape recorder, and were it not for Randy Steele, who's the one who started this radio station that doesn't have the regulation of the internet, being so vocal and so articulate and being able to explain what happened in court, plus one time 32 people showing up, we were able to walk away with some small fine, which we refused to pay because, like you, we realized the pleading is not where it's at. But some people aren't so fortunate. And although Joe can say, read the Arrest and False Imprisonment by Charles A. Weissman, I bet a lot of people have been so traumatized they're never going to protest at a gathering again after what they've been through. But meanwhile, you have shown a real evolution from the time you were on Amy's show, where you, by the way, you looked very beautiful, and then the marks were so horrible. But when
I don't even remember doing that.
Well, when you were on that more public access looking show, I can't remember that man.
With the man.
With the man and the black curtain behind, it wasn't as corporate as Amy's production, but what you said was so powerful, because he wanted to go sort of in that blame area, because we're great proponents of nonviolent communication, and it's about creating connections of empathy. So when it seems as though he was going in the direction, oh, you know, the policemen are so cruel, and you spoke about being in the police car, and do you want to say for our viewers or listeners what you said? It was so moving.
Sure. I mean, this was actually during a follow-up arrest. I was charged with obstruction of governmental administration and went back to trial the month after I got out of Rikers. They went on a character assassination spree where they tried to bring me back to trial and put me in jail for a year for videotaping two undocumented youth, or at least I believe them to be, being unfairly arrested by the police. Mm-hmm. And when I was speaking to these police officers, as I did often throughout my time in Occupy, I really felt like they were part of the 1%. I mean, sorry, part of the 99%. They absolutely are. And we got into a conversation about Occupy Wall Street, and the officer said, you know, you think that we don't agree with you? You think that we wouldn't be out there with you? We have a job to do. You know, we have contracts that haven't been negotiated. We have a union that is chosen from the top down. We have no choice in who we choose as the people that give us orders. And when they give us orders, if we don't follow through with the maximum amount of force, then, you know, we get written up. And if we get 3 write-ups, then we don't get chosen for promotion. And our entire pensions are based off of promotion. So, you know, it's like I have to feed my wife and my kids. So I can't go out there and stand with you when we're struggling with the same problems.
Right. No, I thought that was very impressive how you expressed that, and I encourage people to go to the site.
Well, I mean, certainly I felt like the same was true of the correction officers and Rikers. I mean, I think that especially well-meaning white folks have a tendency to think that COs are racist white men in jails, like just looking to get their jollies off of torturing and abusing black and brown people. But I met only 2 white COs my entire time I was there. And as, you know, my fellow prisoners would explain to me, every single one of the COs in there knew somebody from the outside. And, you know, if you think about it, really, people who are made to work in prisons for a livelihood are, in fact, themselves in prison. They're like one step out of, you know, the social and economic conditions that land people in the prisons. And, again, they have to do what they're told, or in their circumstance, they can literally end up in there.
Right. I would like, you were talking about the medical conditions in Rikers. I would like our audience to hear some of that, because I've had friends in Rikers who've been hurt really bad and could not get any medical attention in Rikers. And I think that's something that we really need to make people aware of. Could you speak on that?
Yes. I would say, to make it most accessible, imagine any basic ailment that you have ever had in your entire life, whether it be the cold or the flu or a stomach ulcer or an ingrown toenail. That in Rikers can be a death sentence. And in one case, I watched it become one. Essentially, medical treatment in Rikers is an intake exam where, I mean, you're not a name, but a number, and you don't know your doctor's name. And in fact, you may not even have a conversation, because several of the doctors in there do not speak English. They're the lowest possible denominator of who is contracted into the medical world. They are allowed to turn their name tags around so that you can't see them, and often do. From then on out, if you need medical care, you have to wake up at 5:30 a.m. again, you don't have an alarm. Nobody's going to wake you up. You have to sign up the night before to get on this list and have somebody somehow wake you up. Then you go down, and you could be waiting for up to 12 hours to see a doctor. It is unlikely that you're going to get in to see a doctor that first day. Essentially, everybody in the entire dormitory, in my case, the women's dormitory, Rosensinger Center, is corralled there. And you're lined up in the order that your corrections officer brought you down. You could be waiting there for up to 5 days, 12 hours on end, before you see anybody. And you're brought in to see a general doctor, at which point you are then signed up for a specialty doctor that could take an average of 6 weeks, even longer, 2 or 3 months, before you get in to see a specialty doctor. In that case, for instance, my friend had a stomach ulcer and did not speak English very well, and so none of the doctors explained to her what was wrong with her. She had blood in her stool for several weeks, and she brought down a stool sample, and they called her down 2 weeks later, and they had lost her stool sample. They told her she had to give another one, and when she refused, they told her she had to sign a sheet of paper. And she brought this sheet of paper up to me, and it said, on pain of death, you are waiving your rights to medical attention. And she didn't know what it said because she didn't read English. So I convinced her to go back down and made a few calls to bring some attention to it, but she did eventually get treated. On the other hand, my friend Ida, who had suffered before with cancer of the esophagus, was having symptoms identical to what she had had before. And she had been there for 3 months and asked and provided medical records to back her claim, and still nobody had brought her to an oncologist. Finally, there was Judith, who came in with, she was on a prescription pills, methadone, for her back pain, low-grade methadone, which is also, methadone liquid is used for treating addiction. And because she had been in there over a decade prior with addiction and had been prescribed liquid methadone, they put her on liquid methadone again, which, if you are not an addict, will promptly shut down your entire organs.
You know, I know it was given to cancer patients as a painkiller. That shocked me. So
Let her finish. Go ahead.
Well, her organs shut down, and she ended up vomiting up chunks of her liver. When the doctors came up and she had blood all over her, she was delirious to the point that she didn't know the difference between the bathroom and the storage supply closet, or even her name. She didn't want to go down with them, obviously. She wanted to stay upstairs with her friends. And they left and refused to come back up and get her. So when two prisoners literally carried her downstairs, the corrections officer, not wanting to be held liable, let them go. They walked in, and the doctors laughed at her when the inmates called her a medical emergency. She ended up dying a few days later from massive organ failure. And nobody did anything about it. And in fact, nobody even notified her family. Her sister found out because she got letters back that Judith was no longer there, then called the hospitals to find out she was dead, and found my article in the New York Times about Judith and said, this can't possibly be her, could it? And called the New York Times, and the New York Times put us in contact so I could tell her what had happened to her sister. Luckily, we also set her up with a civil suit and a lawyer. But, I mean, that's just the tip of the iceberg. Doctors routinely sexually assault female inmates, claiming that there's a chromosomal inadequacy, that they can't tell whether or not a lady is a man or a woman, and feel her up without any nurses present. There's an OBGYN who routinely sexually assaults women. I had the displeasure of seeing him, and was in fact he was over-invasive to the point of convincing me that I could have cancer, and removing a part of my body, her cells from my body, without really explaining to me what he was doing. There are doctors there that also routinely make women trade sexual favors for medical care. So, I mean, it's pretty sickening once you really get down to it.
Yeah, I've been in prison myself, and I've seen lots of the same abuses. This is not just at Rikers. This is systematic across our whole country, and it's time for the American people to wake up to the inhumanity that is going on within our prison system.
I totally agree with you, and I think it's certainly a structural occurrence when you paint an entire peoples, and generally two races, black and brown, as inhuman and criminal, and then essentially people are allowed to do whatever they will with them.
And don't forget our media. Our media, when they show prisons, they turn around and they show the most violent, the most demented prisoners to the American people, and they make all the American people believe, yes, those people belong there, and they don't show the millions of people that are in there for basically nonviolence, no real victim.
No harm.
Our prisons are full of victimless crime. Well, it's not a crime if there's no victim, but somehow our courts have filled the prisons with people who there is no victim. There's no one in court to say that person did harm.
Certainly, I was the only person in my entire sentencing dorm who had a violent offense, and I had by far the highest crime in my sentencing dorm.
Wow.
So, I mean, I totally agree with you, and I think the bigger issue here is even under what you just said, and that's also that they're not seen as people who commit crimes, because I think that people saw them as people just like them who committed so-called crimes, as you rightly define. No matter had they committed crimes or not, people still have to be treated like people, but it's
right on.
Beyond just the criminalization, it's how criminalization overrides humanization.
Right, it's the dehumanization of people. A
complete lack of rehabilitation. There was no... if you can imagine it, there was not even a library at Rosensinger Center. Most of these women were there, for months without any access to programs. Many of these people were imprisoned for up to, the longest that I met was 7 years, without being charged for any crime whatsoever.
It's horrifying.
It's really horrifying. And especially in circumstances where, everything that people think of as most horrific about jail, it's so far behind that. People think of things like wearing uniform, well, you don't get a uniform until you're sentenced. So whatever it is that you came in wearing, if nobody can bring you anything else, and you don't make any friends, or if you're in solitary, you're wearing that only outfit that you came in with from the beginning. And there's not like laundry. You have to hand wash all of your own clothes, and there's no such thing as detergent. The soap that they use, Corecraft, that is also made in the system and is used in the public entities throughout New York. is so harsh and made of lye that I literally scrubbed off the top layer of my face the first time I used it, creating a really nasty infection. I mean, there's, on occasion, not sanitary products. I mean, really, you know, people ask me to explain, like, what's an average day in Rikers like, to try to, like, characterize the horrors. But that's the thing, is human beings can get used to and socialize to any form of constant horror. The horror of Rikers is that there is no order. There's no seeming rule of law. You're given an inmate rights handbook that includes, you know, what are your rights along with what are the rules you have to follow. And none of that matters. It just depends who is in your room at what given day and who their supervisor is. So you don't even know from, you know, minute to minute what to do or how to act so as not to get in trouble. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, at any moment you may be forced to strip or lie face down while dogs come into your room, or, you know, the way that they train and haze new COs is by making sure that they appropriately tear apart your barracks right in front of you, trying to provoke you into a response. I mean, I almost got put into solitary confinement once because I failed a P test because I have very severe ADHD, and I've been prescribed Adderall only after members of the city council had to get involved on my behalf in order that I may be prescribed the medication that I've been on for 20 years of my life. Otherwise, they put me on what they put all the rest of the inmates on, who, regardless of their condition, they all prescribe you the same sedative.
What is Adderall?
It's for ADHD.
And it gives a P test as if you had marijuana?
It's an amphetamine salt.
I see.
So it gave the appearance of like cocaine. But yeah, I mean, they put me on this sedative that literally made me lose 3 days of my life. I don't remember them. So, I mean, that's what they put everybody on in Rikers who has anything from bipolar to depression to schizophrenia to OCD, ADHD, without any psychiatric therapy or consultation, which is really crazy, especially when your bunkie does have schizophrenia. So there's a woman in there who's Felicia, who's been in there for years, who's known on behalf of all of Rikers as the woman who is in solitary confinement, who stores her feces and smears them all over the plexiglass so as to cover herself from the COs looking in, eats her feces and spits them out at COs. It's like, this is somebody that clearly needs to be in a facility where she can get psychiatric care. But instead, you know, she's just made fun of.
Yeah, unfortunately, I've seen that when I was in myself. What do you say to the people out there about getting involved? We on this station, or at least me and Paula on all our shows, always try to get the listeners involved. What would your plea be to the listeners? How do we get the listeners to get involved, or what would you suggest that they get involved?
Well, certainly, I think this is going to take, first and foremost, a social movement, rather, I guess, that precedes a political one. I think that the biggest thing that needs to change is our conception of who are people that are in prison. There's a ton of different ways you can get involved on that front. If you're in New York, check out resistrikers.com. Those are the people that are trying to effect immediate changes at Rikers as sort of the bastion it's the largest penal colony in the United States, and certainly the most famous one. So changes there can really influence change elsewhere. Otherwise, get involved with, at the very least, I mean, you can inform yourself by doing prisoner writing, joining a prisoner writing group. Every, major city has a very well-developed prison writing group. And that will be your immediate channel into further, prison justice change. Otherwise, I think really seriously that all of us should take jury duty very seriously, especially on the progressive left. Do what it needs to take to not avoid jury duty, but get on a jury and nullify. I think that we absolutely, one of the things that we can do as like one citizen, like trial by trial, is nullify trials. That means to refuse to indict somebody on a charge by way of saying that the law itself is not acceptable, or the justice system itself is not acceptable. And by one person, you can force, at the very least, a retrial, if not a dropping of the charges, in any jury trial. So I think like nullification is like one way that a single individual can speak volumes against this horrific prison justice system.
Yeah, we've actually done quite a few shows on that, and I would like to add to that people out there, you can vote if you're on a jury, you can vote your conscience. If you believe that injustice is happening, or that the law itself is discriminating or being applied unfairly,
or that you just don't agree with any law that would put somebody in further harm's way by imprisoning them.
Yes.
We understand that putting somebody in prison is not rehabilitative. It's not going, at the very least, putting somebody in prison is not going to reform their character. Absolutely will not reform their character by the system that we have in place right now. It will not do that. And in that sense, you can vote to nullify. I mean, even if it's a heinous circumstance, a heinous, crime that maybe even was legitimately committed, at the very least, what you can do is nullify the trial, and they'll likely get a plea bargain that will send them to prison anyhow, but for a lesser amount of time. Like, putting somebody in jail is never going to make them necessarily a better person. Ever.
Have you ever looked into the Chris reports? Because you seem very savvy on understanding the bank fraud in that interview that I was so impressed with at your website.
That's the court registry investment system?
I have not.
Oh, you should. You really should study to find out about court registry investment system. Do you know judges make money for their retirement for every year they give somebody in a sentence? Money goes into their retirement. That's why judges rarely let people off and always try to get the biggest sentence that they can on people, because every year that a judge gives as a sentence, the court registry investment system, and what's the other one?
I think that beyond the progressive left and, what people would call, bleeding heart liberals, I mean, even if you want to take just like a basic capitalist, your best interest response here, it is still with to nullify. Essentially, the average child that attends school in New York City gets something like under $500 per year based off of tax dollars, when it takes closer to $100,000 per year to hold somebody in our prison system in the state of New York. And so it's just,
right.
It's really not good for anybody
Right.
at all.
Yeah, we're in agreement on that. But you should definitely you should learn about the court registry investment system, and you'll see the judges profit from incarceration, and so there's not a chance for people to get a fair trial when the judge is going to make money by a conviction. So once the people know that there's no chance for a fair trial because the judge profits from convictions. So,
I mean, certainly less than 3% of felony cases in the United States go to trial. That means that 97% of felons have been put into jail, like, without the basis of trial by jury. I mean, it's just...
by threat and intimidation, they say, we're going to give you 20 years if you don't cop to 5. And people are so afraid of the 20-year sentence that they cop to 5, which is against everything that our founding fathers had wanted when they set up our legal system.
Our children that at the age of 12, on charges of murder, are required to be charged as an adult in the state of New York and in the state of North Carolina. I mean, I was in charge of children in Rikers. I was a suicide prevention aide, which means I just had to... my job title was suicide prevention aide, and I was made to walk around making sure nobody cut up or hung up, tried to hang themselves or cut themselves. Everybody's required to work when you're in prison. Otherwise, you lose your good days. So it's actually slavery. And so I was in with a 16-year-old and a 17-year-old who had been there each for over 3 years. And both of them were there on charges of conspiracy murder, which meant that they happened to be around at the time that the murder took place, and were somehow involved in the circumstance. Like one of them, who was forced into prostitution at the age of 12, was there while her pimp was being killed by men. And in this sense, like, I mean, I just like, you know, when I say these things aloud as realities of things that I've seen and witnessed and now live, the whole world turns upon its head for me. I just can't understand, like, how any of this makes any sense. Like, how these poor children that were exposed to circumstances that already have ripped away their entire childhood and innocence are now facing life in prison.
It's called victimizing the victims, and it's common in America.
But we don't even see them as human to begin with. I mean, that's the biggest thing for me, is that if everybody out there knows somebody, at least, who knows somebody that is in prison. The state of Delaware and Louisiana in and of themselves, Louisiana being the first and Delaware being the second in the amount of prisoners in any state in the United States. Both states have more prisoners in their own states than any other country in the entire world. So Delaware, the sixth least populous state in the United States, tiny little place, pull out a map, like, has more prisoners in numbers, not in percentage, in numbers, than all of Russia, all of China, all of South Africa, all of any other fascist state that we have ever, like, all of Israel, like, you know, all of, you know, North Korea. Like, there are more prisoners there. And so every single person knows somebody who knows somebody that is in prison. Make it a point to talk about it. Let's let it not any longer be socially stigmatized. Let's talk about who we know in prison, why they're there, what went wrong, and how you can get involved to write a letter maybe, make a visit maybe, put pressure on a local representative to see that person get out by their first parole date. There's like so many things that each one of us can do to humanize a circumstance of somebody who's been stripped of their humanity. And if we don't get them out soon enough, then that humanity will never return. It's a part of your psyche that you have to shut down in order to live in there.
Hi, let me just interrupt for a minute to say that we're going to lose the TV station now because it is coming up to midnight. So if you want to hear the end of the program, tune over right now to 104.1 on your FM dial to Woodstock 104, and the carousel is coming up for Channel 23. So good night to Channel 23.